This is the 992 generation of the Porsche 911 GT3, and in many ways, I believe that it's the perfect 911. Now that is quite a bold statement, especially when you consider that there are currently 26 different 911s to choose from on the market, but the GT3 is quite a bold car. So in today's video, I'll justify that viewpoint by taking you through the GT3's exterior, interior. We'll talk its performance, do a real quick first impressions road test, and end by assigning it some CarCave credits. We'll start with the exterior design. Now, the Porsche engineers had a mantra when making the new GT3, and that was carpe secundum, get the most out of every second. And the result of that was that there's some pretty intense aerodynamics incorporated into this car compared to the standard 911. Most noticeably is this rear wing. It's actually a swan neck mounting system, something that's not too uncommon in the racing scene with like the 911 RSR, for example, which actually inspired the design of the wing on this car, but it's a little bit less common on road cars. The main benefit of this new mounting system is that you have more consistent downforce when cornering, and that means that you can corner at higher speeds. You also have a body incorporated little lip spoiler, which I think looks very good, gives you also some more downforce. Some fake vents on either side. Okay, that's fine. And then you have a redesigned rear diffuser compared to the standard 911. In fact, the entire rear bumper, I think, is completely different. And you have the iconic GT3 central dual exhaust pipes. All of this means that this car produces an insane amount of downforce. In fact, compared to the 991.2 GT3, the previous generation, this rear wing alone produces 4 times more downforce, and this rear diffuser produces 60% more downforce. So you can kind of start to put a picture together of how amazing of a car this is going to be on track. On the subject of wheels, this is the first GT3 to have staggered wheels, 20 inches in the front, 21 inches in the rear, and those wider tires are going to give you more of a contact patch and better grip. There aren't any actual selections that you can make for the wheels as far as styling. You can really just change your color and pinstriping, but that's fine because these wheels look quite good. And of course, it being a GT3, they're center locking wheels as opposed to having traditional lugs. Moving on to the front end of the car, it's an entirely new design for the front bumper compared to the standard Carrera, and it's littered with vents and slots and different things so you can cool your brakes, get air to your radiators, and look much, much cooler. As for the overall body of the GT3 compared to the standard car, it's 0.7 inches lower thanks to PASM, Porsche Active Suspension Management, which comes standard on this car. It's no wider, interestingly enough, but it is 2.1 inches longer. One thing that stood out to me is that compared to pretty much every other trim of the 911, the GT3 and in fact the GT3 RS have a slightly longer wheelbase. Why that is, I'm not quite sure, but I thought it was worth a mention. On the interior of the GT3, it's very familiar to every other 911 with a couple of notable exceptions. So the Alcantara steering wheel, Alcantara gear selector, you've got Alcantara on the roof lining as well. All of that comes standard for this car. You actually have some on the dash as well, and it all feels very nice. Obviously you have PASM as well, so you can change the characteristics of your suspension at the click of a button. With the standard 911, you have all of the normal Porsche driving modes. You've got wet, sport, sport plus. With the GT3, it's a little bit more no nonsense. You only have 3 modes to choose from: normal, sport, and track mode. When you put the car in track mode, it changes a bunch of stuff about the car, but it also turns off 2 of the displays, the one on the far right and the far left, but I don't really mind it so much because I can't see them anyway. From my driving position, the steering wheel blocks them. However, if you do get anxiety thinking, oh my God, where have my screens gone? There's an option that you can actually turn them back on and retain track mode, so that's totally fine. Pretty much everything else on this car is going to be an optional extra. Couple things that I would say you need, and need is kind of a funny word to use on a car like this, but I'd say you should get the Sport Chrono package as well as the front axle lift system so that you clench up a little bit less when you come up to your driveway. Luckily, this car has both of those as well as quite a lot of other options. You got carbon fiber on the center as well. You have it on the dashboard. Has these beautiful carbon bucket seats. Only thing I would say about these carbon buckets, I've seen some cars with some higher mileage and the bolstering tends to wear a little bit. You start seeing those creases, but other than that, these seats are brilliant, and overall the inside of this car is really nice. I like the interior of the 992 Gen. In terms of performance, this GT3 has a naturally aspirated 4-liter flat six, and that produces 501 brake horsepower, 346 pound-feet of torque. Now that drives the rear wheels only, and you have 2 transmission options. You can do the 6-speed manual like I have in this car, or the 7-speed PDK. It's not the same 8-speed that you get in all of the other 911s. All those performance figures are great, but they're not that impressive, especially when you consider that the MSRP on this car is $182,900. So your first impression might be, well, I can get just as much power from a car that costs quite a lot less, and you would be right. However, and there is a big however, I wouldn't be fooled by the numbers on paper. Porsche claims this car will do 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds. But Car and Driver and Motor Trend have gotten their hands on this car, and they've done 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds. That means that this car is faster to 60 than a Lamborghini Huracan Technica, a Ferrari F8 Tributo, and only 0.1 seconds slower than a McLaren 720S. Those are cars that have way more horsepower, way more expensive, and this is outperforming them. It should come as no surprise that it's not just straight line speed. I mentioned earlier that this car is a serious track machine. It lapped the Nürburgring in 6 minutes 55.34. That means that this GT3, which costs 180 grand, is faster than a Porsche 918 Spyder, the last generation of the GT3 RS, and a McLaren P1. So you can see that on paper, this car doesn't need to make sense, because when it actually performs, it goes so far above its weight class. And thanks to the less drag that this rear swan neck spoiler is producing, the top speed of this car with PDK is 197 miles per hour. And with the manual, it's 199 miles per hour. So what I'd love to do right now is take it out for a real quick first impressions road test, because although I've driven previous generations of the GT3, I have not yet had the opportunity to drive the 992. Driving the car right now, I've got it in normal mode, and it feels fine. That's part of the reason why I think the GT3 is the best 911. First of all, it's naturally aspirated, which most 911s are not anymore. And the only other naturally aspirated 911 is going to be the GT3 RS, which is such a niche car, in my opinion. It's not something that you're gonna wanna be driving every single day, but in this, I could drive this every single day, and I wouldn't mind even in the slightest. It's the perfect balance of what a base 911 offers you in its usability and what the 911 GT3 RS offers you in its track capability. And that, I think, is the major selling point of this GT3. This car being the manual transmission, it's much more engaging than the PDK, even if it is a little bit slower. As for which transmission I would choose, I think it's really going to depend on what you want the car for. If you're buying the GT3 because you're gonna be taking it to the track all the time and you just wanna set the fastest lap times, I would go for the PDK. It's a faster transmission. But if you're just buying it as an all-around car and what you're really looking for is the sensations of driving a proper performance car, I would go for the 6-speed manual. And it revs to 9,000 RPM. I mean, yeah, I love this car. Now, I talked earlier about some cars that this competes with, but those cars are much more expensive. Those are, for the most part, full-blown supercars. And I can't really think of a car that slots perfectly into the same market that the GT3 does, because those cars are much more expensive, and you can get performance track variant versions of other sports cars like the GT500 or the Corvette Z06, and those are going to perform very well. But again, I wouldn't consider those to be in the same market as this GT3. So in that sense, this car doesn't really have any competitors, because the cars that I would consider to be competitors with the GT3 would be things like the Audi R8, the Mercedes-Benz AMG GTR, even the Dodge Viper ACR, the Acura NSX, all cars that are now discontinued. You can't buy them as brand new cars anymore. So there's a void in the market, and it's a void that pretty much only the GT3 can fill. Now, I'll flash up a comparison chart of all of those cars for you to be able to see how they stack up against the GT3, so go ahead and check that out. Finally, the Car Cave credits. This is my way of summarizing my final thoughts on a car in 4 different categories. For collectability, I would give the GT3 a 7 out of 10. It's naturally aspirated and offered in a manual, which isn't a combination that I see too often in our future. For daily drivability, I'd give it a 4 out of 10. It's comfortable and manageable, but it's by no means an average experience day to day. For trackworthiness, it's an 8 out of 10. It outperforms cars that it shouldn't be able to, and its aerodynamics are quite clever. For coolness factor, this is obviously subjective, but I would give the GT3 a 7 out of 10. It's a very cool car and one that I wouldn't mind owning one day. This gives the GT3 a total of 26 Car Cave credits. That's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Big thank you to Porsche of Riverside for loaning me this GT3, which is currently for sale, and it's beautiful. It looks like it's matte paint, but what it actually is agate gray, and it's wrapped with a protective film that gives it a matte appearance. So it looks fantastic. If you're in the market for a GT3, I will leave the regular links down below to their website, social media, and the posting for this car, which is currently available. Other than that, leave me a comment with your thoughts on the GT3, and like and subscribe to show your support for the channel, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss a post. But until the next video, thank you again for watching, and take care.